I still don't know why that afternoon sticks in my head. Maybe it was the light in the bookstore, the way it cut across the shelves like thin pieces of glass. Or maybe it was her, standing near the corner table, flipping through a book she clearly wasn't reading. I'd seen her before, plenty of times. Elaine, my stepmom. We weren't close. Not really. Just polite conversations over family dinners, small nods in passing. But lately, I'd started noticing small things I shouldn't. Things like how she always carried her coffee mug with both hands, like she was afraid of spilling it. How she paused before answering questions, as if measuring the exact weight of her words. That day, I was there for something simple, to pick up a book for class. I didn't expect her to be there at all. "Caleb," she said, looking up when she noticed me. Her voice was soft, almost careful, like she wasn't sure if she should be speaking at all. "Hey," I replied, trying to sound casual. I tapped the edge of a paperback in my hand, pretending to read the back cover. "You come here often?" she asked, glancing at the shelves behind me. I shrugged. "Sometimes. When I want quiet." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, but noticeable. She looked back at her book, tracing her finger along a paragraph she wasn't really following. I couldn't stop my eyes from flicking toward her hands, the way her thumb pressed lightly into the paper. We weren't supposed to have moments like this. Not ones that stretched longer than they needed to. I shifted my weight, pulling at the sleeve of my hoodie. You reading something good?" Her lips curved into a small, distracted smile. "Trying to. But I keep rereading the same sentence." I laughed softly, more air than sound. "Happens to me all the time." She looked up at me then, just for a second, and something passed between us I couldn't name. Not attraction exactly, more like recognition. The silence after felt heavier than it should have. I cleared my throat. "Do you want me to grab you a coffee?" I was heading to the counter anyway. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, thank you." But her voice was quiet. Almost, softer than usual. I turned toward the cafe counter anyway, needing something to do with my hands. While I waited for my order, I kept replaying that glance in my head. It wasn't anything, I told myself. Just, nothing. When I came back, she was closing her book, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Heading out?" I asked. "Yeah. I should." She stood, smoothing her coat with one hand. "Your dad's working late tonight," she said, like it was just a passing fact. I nodded, sipping my coffee, pretending the thought didn't land somewhere deep. We walked out together, side by side but not touching, the cool air folding around us. She stopped near her car, keys in hand, and turned slightly toward me. "You should drop by later," she said carefully. "I made extra dinner." It was casual, almost too casual. But her eyes held mine for a fraction longer than they should have. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I folded the napkin in my hand into a perfect square, slow and deliberate, like my body was buying time my mouth didn't have. When I finally looked up, she was already in her car, the door closing, her face half lit by the fading sun. A moment later, my phone buzzed. "Elaine, don't forget what I said." I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering, unsent replies stacking up in my head. That was the first time I realized something had shifted. And nothing after that felt ordinary. I didn't plan to see her the next day. But the rain had other plans. I was leaving the campus library when the sky opened up, sheets of water hitting the pavement so hard it blurred the world into silver streaks. I ducked under the overhang, shaking the rain from my hoodie, and that's when I saw her, Elaine, standing at the far end, half sheltered, holding a folded umbrella she clearly hadn't used. She glanced over when I stepped closer, eyebrows raised like she was deciding whether to speak. Guess we're stuck, I said, pushing my hands into my pockets. Seems that way, she replied, looking back at the street. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I watched the drops pool and slide down her coat sleeve, tracing small patterns before falling. I wanted to ask her why she wasn't using the umbrella, but somehow it felt too intimate, too obvious. Instead, I nodded toward it. Not working? She hesitated, then smiled faintly. I don't like umbrellas. That threw me off. You'd rather get drenched? It feels honest, she said, still looking at the rain. Like nothing's pretending to hold it back. I didn't answer right away, but the thought stayed with me longer than it should have. A few students ran past us, shouting and laughing as they dashed into the downpour, and for a while, the only sound was water pounding against the pavement. Then, softly, she said, I used to love storms when I was younger. I glanced at her. Used to? She tilted her head, thinking. Somewhere along the way, I stopped, letting myself enjoy things. Her voice cracked a little on that last word, but she recovered quickly, brushing at a wet strand of hair sticking to her cheek. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just watched her from the corner of my eye, pretending to study the streetlights flickering in the rain. That's when it hit me, how close we were standing. How close we weren't supposed to be. The thought made my stomach knot. She was my dad's wife. Older. Someone I was supposed to treat like family. I tried to remind myself of that, but my mind betrayed me, sketching quiet, impossible scenarios I couldn't control, the kind where we stayed in this moment just a little longer, where neither of us had to leave. I hated myself for thinking it. She turned to me suddenly, breaking the silence. You're shivering, she said, reaching out without thinking. Her hand brushed the damp sleeve of my hoodie, light, barely there, but enough to make my chest feel tight. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Guess I should start liking umbrellas. She laughed softly, real this time, and shook her head. Maybe. The rain kept falling, relentless, and we stayed there, waiting, saying nothing else. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. 2 days passed before I saw her again. I was shelving books in the quiet corner of the campus library when I noticed it, a small steel thermos, sitting on the edge of the returns desk. Black, scratched, familiar. Elaine's. I held it in my hand for a second longer than I should have, thumb brushing over a tiny dent on the lid. It felt personal somehow, touching something she carried every day. I found her upstairs, near the windowed reading area where the rain streaked glass like thin white threads. She was hunched over a book she wasn't reading, staring past the pages. You forgot this, I said, holding out the thermos. She blinked up at me, slow to return to the present, then smiled faintly. I was wondering where I left it. When she reached for it, our fingers almost touched. Almost. I pulled back too quickly, pretending to adjust my grip. You always carry this, I said, trying to sound casual. I do, she said softly. Habit, I guess. Some days I don't even drink from it. It just makes me feel like I've got something to hold on to. I didn't reply. Couldn't, really. Because in that quiet, I understood more than she said. I sat down across from her without asking. Too casual, like I'd done it 100 times before, even though this was the first. For a while, neither of us spoke. Just the soft hum of the heater, the turning of a page she wasn't reading, the way my knee kept bouncing under the table until I forced it still. Then, out of nowhere, she said, Your dad's been working late a lot. I froze mid-sip from my water bottle, lowering it slowly. Yeah, he has. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away, pretending to refocus on the book. It's just quiet at home lately. I nodded but didn't trust myself to answer. My chest felt tight, like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't ready to name. Before I could say anything, someone cleared their throat nearby. One of her colleagues, a woman from the English department, paused by the shelf, smiling faintly. "Elaine, didn't expect to see you here this late." Elaine straightened instantly, pushing the thermos into her bag, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Just catching up on some reading," she said, voice lighter, almost too casual. The colleague glanced between us, her smile polite but curious, then walked off without another word. Silence returned, heavier now. Elaine leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, but her fingers tapped lightly against her elbow, restless, unsteady. I wanted to say something. Anything. But all I managed was, "You okay?" She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze steady but unreadable. Then, barely above a whisper, "Caleb, it wasn't my name." "Not really." Not the way she said it. I leaned forward slightly, without thinking, until we were too close. My hand brushed the edge of her sleeve, barely, but enough. And then, footsteps again. Someone else walked in. She pulled back first. The silence after that stayed with him, heavier than before. The faculty dinner wasn't my idea. One of my professors had insisted I come, networking, he called it, but all I could think about when I walked into the crowded restaurant was how badly I wanted to leave. And then I saw her. Elaine was at the far end of the room, laughing politely at something someone said, her hand resting lightly on a wine glass she hadn't touched. Her dress was simple, dark green, but I noticed how the soft light caught the edge of her collarbone. I looked away too quickly, pretending to scan the menu. She noticed me anyway. Of course she did. Her gaze caught mine for half a second longer than anyone else's would have, just enough for my chest to tighten. I sat 2 tables away, close enough to hear snippets of her voice when the room dipped quiet, too far to be part of her circle. For most of the evening, we didn't speak. But the distance between us said more than words could have. Every time someone leaned close to her, I caught myself staring, then forcing my eyes elsewhere, pretending interest in conversations I couldn't follow. Jealousy wasn't the right word. It was quieter than that. Smaller, but sharper. After dinner, most people drifted toward the outdoor terrace where strings of lights hung above small tables. I stepped out for air, leaning against the railing, pretending to check messages on my phone. "Caleb," a voice said softly behind me. I turned, and there she was, holding her glass by the stem, half full but untouched. "You came," she said, as if she hadn't expected me to. "Professor Marsh insisted," I muttered, trying for a small smile. She nodded, setting the glass down on the railing. "I didn't think you liked crowds." "I don't," I admitted. "But I'm here." The pause stretched too long, both of us caught in it. The chatter from the terrace blurred into background noise. "You seem distant tonight," she said finally, her tone careful, like testing the edge of something fragile. I hesitated. Then, I wasn't sure if I should even say hello. She studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Why?" My throat went dry. I shrugged, uselessly. "Because this," I gestured vaguely between us, "whatever this is, it doesn't feel safe." Her hand tightened slightly on the railing. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said quietly, "I know." Something in her voice, soft, restrained, almost breaking, made me want to say everything I shouldn't. To tell her about the rain, the thermos, the nights I'd replayed her smile in my head. Instead, I just said, "Do you ever think about it?" She didn't ask what I meant. Her lips parted, like she might answer, but a burst of laughter from behind us snapped the moment. Someone stepped outside, looking for her. Elaine turned back toward the terrace, her voice steady now. "We should go inside." But she didn't move. And neither did I. This scene holds them right at the edge, a quiet breaking point where both know what's happening but neither says it out loud. For 3 days, I didn't see her. No late-night lights in the kitchen. No texts about dinner. No quiet glances at the library. It felt like someone had hit mute on an entire part of my life. By the 4th day, I gave in and stopped by the bookstore after class, the same one where I first ran into her. I thought maybe I'd accidentally find her there again, pretending to browse titles neither of us really wanted. But she wasn't there. Instead, I spotted a book she used to talk about, The House of Mirth, on the display table. Without thinking, I picked it up, flipping through the worn pages, half expecting her voice to fill the silence. "Looking for someone?" a voice behind me asked. I turned to see Anna, her friend from the English department. Her smile was polite but edged. "No," I lied, too fast. She raised an eyebrow, holding my gaze for a beat longer than comfortable, then nodded slowly. "Elaine's been busy lately," she said, deliberately vague. "You probably shouldn't wait around." I frowned. "Busy?" Anna hesitated, then leaned in slightly. "Her son's back in town. Thought you should know." Her son. Right. I'd forgotten he was even coming home. The reminder landed like cold water. I nodded, pretending it didn't matter, pretending I wasn't standing there holding a book I didn't want just because it reminded me of her. That night, I sat at my desk, phone in hand, typing and deleting the same message over and over. "You okay?" Deleted. "Haven't seen you around." Deleted. "I miss," deleted faster. Nothing felt right. On the 5th day, she finally showed up at the library. She looked different somehow, pulled back. Polished. Like someone had ironed out the soft edges I'd grown used to. "Hey," I said carefully, keeping my voice low. "Hi," she replied, not meeting my eyes. I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her bag and set a stack of papers on the counter. "Could you hold these until tomorrow?" she asked, voice clipped, efficient. "Sure," I managed, forcing a small smile. She nodded, murmured a quick thanks, and left without lingering. No pause. No glance back. Nothing. I sat there long after she left, the papers untouched, the room too quiet. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. That night, I drove past her house. Lights were on in the living room. Shadows moved behind the curtains, 2, maybe 3. Her son was probably there. Maybe her husband, too. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands gripping the wheel, staring at the door. I almost knocked. Almost. But I didn't. It was late when I pulled into the driveway. I hadn't planned to come. I told myself I'd just drive past again, like last time, but somehow my hands had turned the wheel without asking me first. The house was quiet from the outside, warm yellow light spilling faintly through the kitchen window. I hesitated at the door, half ready to leave, when it opened before I could knock. Elaine stood there, barefoot, holding a mug in both hands. She looked surprised, but not shocked, like maybe she'd been expecting this without admitting it to herself. "Caleb," she said softly. "It's late." "I know," I replied. My voice sounded rougher than I meant it to. For a second, neither of us moved. Then she stepped aside just enough to let me in. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and something sweet cooling on the counter. The air felt heavier inside, quieter somehow, like sound carried differently here. "You want tea?" she asked after a moment, setting her mug down. I shook my head. "No, thanks." She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself, leaning back against the counter. "You shouldn't be here," she said, not looking at me. "I know," I said again. The silence stretched, and I could feel it pressing against us, thick and unspoken. My hands were cold, shoved deep into my hoodie pocket, and I couldn't stop tapping my thumb against my palm. Finally, I said, I tried to call last night. Her head tilted slightly, but she didn't turn. I saw. I left a voicemail, I added. Then deleted it. Why? I hesitated. Because I didn't know if you'd want to hear it. She exhaled slowly, like the weight of something settled deeper into her chest. What would you have said? She asked finally. I stared at the floor for a long moment, tracing the grain of the wood with my eyes, pretending I could find the answer there. That I stopped, swallowed, started again. That it feels different when you're not around. She looked at me then, really looked, and something flickered in her expression, recognition, maybe. Or guilt. Caleb, she whispered, shaking her head slightly. We can't, I know, I said quickly, stepping back half a step. I know we can't. Her hands twisted together in front of her, restless, searching for something to hold. I wanted to leave. I wanted to stay. I wanted everything and nothing at the same time. She reached out then, almost without thinking, brushing a crumb from my sleeve. Just that, the smallest gesture, but it stopped my breath cold. Neither of us moved. Finally, she whispered, okay. And somehow, that one word felt heavier than any confession could have. It took months for life to settle. Not between us, around us. Classes ended. Summer stretched in quiet pieces. My dad's business trips got longer, and Elaine stopped mentioning them at all. I stopped driving past the house late at night. Stopped typing out messages I'd never send. Stopped pretending I didn't miss her. We saw each other less, intentionally, at first. But routines have a way of pulling people back together without asking permission. It was a Tuesday when it happened. 8:47 a.m. I remember because the clock above the library desk was stuck at that time, the second hand twitching uselessly, like it was trapped. I was shelving returns when I heard her voice behind me. Morning, she said softly, as if she wasn't sure if she should. I turned. She was holding her old black thermos, the dent still there, same as always. Morning, I echoed, setting down the books too quickly. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was different now, not heavy, just clearer somehow. You're early, she said, glancing at the stalled clock. Yeah, I replied. Trying to catch up. She smiled faintly. Me too. We sat down at the far corner table, the one near the window where the rain once ran like silver threads. This time, there was no storm outside, just soft sunlight hitting the glass. She set the thermos down, twisting the lid absent-mindedly. Tea today, she said. I've been drinking less coffee. Since when? I asked. She shrugged. Since someone once offered me tea and I said no. My chest tightened at the memory, but I said nothing. We sat like that for a while, just the sound of pages turning, chairs scraping faintly somewhere in the distance. Quiet, but not tense. At some point, she leaned back, resting her hand lightly on the table. Not reaching for me, not asking, just placing it there. An unspoken choice. I hesitated, then set my hand down too, close enough that our fingers didn't touch, but close enough that they could have. She noticed. Of course she did. But neither of us moved. Finally, she said, I don't want chaos. I know, I replied. And I can't promise perfect, she added softly, almost to herself. I'm not asking for perfect. Her gaze lifted to mine, steady, quiet, sure. For the first time in months, she looked unguarded. We didn't speak after that. Didn't need to. When she stood to leave, she paused by the door, glancing back just once. Same time tomorrow? She asked. I nodded. Same time. I watched her go, sunlight spilling across the floor where she'd been standing. That's when I realized something simple, something grounding: we weren't paused anymore. We were beginning.